The iron gates of St. Mary's Convent creaked as 18-year-old Sarah Mitchell pushed them open for the first time in her life. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she stepped onto the cobblestone path that led to the outside world, world she had only glimpsed through barred windows and heard about in whispered conversations between the nuns. The morning mist clung to the Colorado mountains surrounding the secluded convent, and Sarah pulled her thin coat tighter around her shoulders. In her worn canvas bag, she carried everything she owned: a change of clothes, a small Bible, and most importantly, a yellowed letter written in her mother's fading handwriting, the letter that had changed everything. Sister Margaret had given it to her just 3 days ago, explaining that it was to be opened only when Sarah turned 18. The elderly nun's hands had trembled as she handed over the envelope, her eyes filled with a sadness that Sarah had never seen before. "Your mother wanted you to have this when you were old enough to make your own choices," Sister Margaret had whispered. "Whatever you decide to do with what's inside, may God guide your path." Sarah had waited until the dead of night to read the letter in the privacy of her small dormitory cell. The words were fragmented, desperate, filled with regret and pain. Her mother spoke of mistakes, of secrets, of a man named William Ashford who lived somewhere in the mountains of Colorado. The letter contained an address and a single photograph, a tall man with kind eyes standing beside a luxury car. "Find him," the letter had pleaded. "He is the key to understanding who you are and why I had to leave you in that sacred place. Forgive me, my daughter, for the choices I made, but know that everything I did was to protect you from a world that wanted to use you as a pawn." Now, walking down the mountain road with nothing but faith and determination, Sarah felt the weight of those words. She had never known her father's identity, never understood why her mother had abandoned her at the convent when she was barely a month old. The nuns had raised her with discipline and prayer, but there had always been questions burning inside. Her questions that the holy women either couldn't or wouldn't answer. The September air was crisp, and Sarah's breath formed small clouds as she walked. She had studied the map in the convent's library, memorizing the route to Aspen, where the address in her mother's letter would lead her. It was a journey of over 200 miles through mountain passes and small towns, but she was determined to make it, even if she had to walk every step of the way. Her first ride came from a truck driver named Joe, a kind-hearted man in his 50s who picked her up at a gas station outside Pueblo. He didn't ask too many questions when she explained she was visiting family, though his concerned glances in the rearview mirror told her he sensed there was more to her story. "You be careful out there, young lady," Joe had warned as he dropped her off at a truck stop in Glenwood Springs. "Mountain roads can be treacherous, especially when the weather turns." Sarah thanked him and continued her journey, catching rides with other travelers, walking when she had to, sleeping in 24-hour diners when the cold became unbearable. Each mile brought her closer to answers, but also deeper into uncertainty. What would she find when she reached her destination? Would William Ashford even remember her mother? Would he want to see her? On the third day of her journey, as autumn painted the aspen trees in brilliant golds and reds, Sarah finally arrived in the exclusive neighborhood where the address led her. The houses here were massive, hidden behind tall gates and manicured. Landscapes that spoke of wealth beyond anything she had ever imagined. Her worn shoes felt inadequate on the pristine sidewalks, and she pulled her coat tighter, suddenly self-conscious about her appearance. The Ashford mansion sat at the end of a private road, surrounded by towering pine trees and protected by an elaborate security gate. Sarah stood before the imposing entrance, her finger hovering over the intercom button. The house beyond the gate was like something from a fairy tale, all stone and glass, with multiple levels built into the mountainside. Warm light glowed from several windows, suggesting someone was home, but the place felt eerily quiet. Taking a deep breath, Sarah pressed the button and waited. Static filled the air for a long moment before a deep, weary voice answered. "Who's there?" "My name is Sarah Mitchell," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm looking for William Ashford. I have a letter from my mother. Her name was Catherine Mitchell." The silence that followed stretched so long that Sarah wondered if the connection had been cut. She was about to press the button again when the voice returned, sharper now, filled with something that sounded like shock. "Stay. Right there." The gate buzzed and slowly swung open. Sarah walked up the winding driveway, her heart pounding with each step. The closer she got to the house, the more overwhelming it became. This was a different world, one of privilege and isolation that felt as foreign to her as another planet. The front door opened before she could knock, revealing a man who looked exactly like the photograph in her mother's letter, though 20 years older. William Ashford stood in the doorway, his dark hair now streaked with silver, his once bright eyes shadowed with pain and confusion. He wore an expensive sweater and dark pants, but there was something disheveled about him, as if he had been sleeping poorly for years. "Catherine," he whispered, staring at Sarah as if he were seeing a ghost. "No, sir," Sarah corrected gently. "I'm Sarah, her daughter. My mother, she passed away when I was born." William's face went pale, and he gripped the doorframe for support. For a moment, Sarah thought he might close the door and send her away. Instead, he stepped aside and gestured for her to enter. "Come in," he said quietly. "We need to talk." The car. Interior of the house was breathtaking. Soaring ceilings, artwork that looked like it belonged in museums, furniture that probably cost more than most people's cars. But despite all the luxury, there was something cold and lifeless about the space, as if it were more of a mausoleum than a home. William led her to a sitting room with a massive stone fireplace, where flames crackled and cast dancing shadows on the walls. He poured himself a drink from a crystal decanter, his hands shaking slightly. "Tell me about your mother," he said without turning around. "Tell me what happened to Catherine." Sarah pulled the letter from her bag and handed it to him. As William read, she watched his face change, saw the play of emotions across his features as he absorbed her mother's words. When he finished, he carefully folded the letter and handed it back to her. "She was supposed to meet me," he said finally, sinking into a leather armchair. 20 years ago. We had plans, but she never showed up. I waited for hours at the airport. When I tried to find her, it was as if she had vanished from the earth. She left me at the convent when I was a baby," Sarah said softly. The nun said she was scared, that she kept looking over her shoulder as if someone was following her. William's jaw tightened. Someone probably was. The cryptic response sent a chill down Sarah's spine. "What do you mean?" But William had already stood up, moving to the window that overlooked the darkening mountains. "You shouldn't have come here, Sarah. This place, it's not safe for someone like you." "Someone like me?" He turned to face her, and in his eyes she saw a pain so deep it made her heart ache. "Someone innocent, someone who doesn't know what kind of monsters walk among us, wearing expensive suits and wielding power like weapons." Before Sarah could ask what he meant, the sound of a car engine echoed from the driveway. William's expression immediately darkened, and he moved to another window, peering through the curtains. "He's back," William muttered, more to himself than to Sarah. "Who's back?" "My brother," William said grimly, "and if he finds you here, everything your mother sacrificed to protect you from will have been for nothing." The sound of footsteps on the front porch made them both freeze. Sarah felt her world tilting as she realized that her search for answers had led her into something far more dangerous than she had ever imagined. The peaceful convent that had been her prison for 18 years suddenly seemed like a sanctuary compared to the web of secrets and danger she had stumbled into. As the front door opened and voices filled the hallway, Sarah understood that her journey was just beginning, and the truth she sought might be more terrifying than the questions that had haunted her all her life. "William!" The voice that boomed through the mansion was commanding and cold, filled with the kind of authority that expected immediate obedience. "I know you're here. We need to talk." William quickly grabbed Sarah's arm, his grip urgent but gentle. "There's a back staircase," he whispered. "Go up to the 3rd floor, find the library, lock the door, and don't come out until I come for you." "But I don't understand." "Please," William's eyes pleaded with her. "Trust me. Your mother trusted me once and I failed her. I won't fail you." Sarah hesitated for only a moment before nodding. She had come too far to turn back now, and something in William's desperate expression told her that whatever was happening, her safety depended on remaining hidden. She hurried toward the back of the house, finding the narrow servants' staircase that William had indicated. As she climbed, she could hear voices from below, William's measured tones and another man's aggressive responses. The words were muffled by the distance and the thick walls, but the tension in their exchange was unmistakable. The library on the third floor was a sanctuary of warm wood and leather-bound books that stretched from floor to ceiling. Sarah locked the door behind her and moved to the window, which offered a view of the front driveway. A sleek black sedan sat next to William's Mercedes, its engine still ticking as it cooled. She pressed her ear to the floor, trying to catch pieces of the conversation happening somewhere below. Fragments floated up to her. Should have stayed hidden. Too dangerous. If Senator Blackwood finds out... Senator Blackwood. The name sent ice through Sarah's veins. She had heard that name before, whispered in hushed tones, among the nuns at the convent. Senator Richard Blackwood was a powerful politician from Colorado, known for his family values platform and his influence in Washington. But why would his name come up in a conversation about her? Sarah began exploring the library, looking for anything that might help her understand what she had walked into. Most of the books were classics and business texts, but one section caught her attention, a collection of photo albums and personal documents hidden behind a false panel in one of the bookcases. Her hands trembled as she opened the first album. The photographs inside told the story of a successful businessman's life. William at various corporate events, cutting ribbons, shaking hands with politicians and celebrities. But it was the personal photos that made her breath catch. There, in a series of pictures that looked to be about 20 years old, was her mother. Catherine Mitchell stood beside William at what appeared to be a charity gala, her dark hair elegantly styled, wearing a stunning blue dress. She was radiant, laughing at something William had whispered in her ear. They looked happy, in love, completely unaware of the tragedy that awaited them. As Sarah turned the pages, the story became clearer. More photos showed William and Catherine together at various events, always formal, always public, but the intimacy between them was obvious to anyone who looked closely. Then suddenly the photos of Catherine stopped. The remaining pictures showed William alone, his smiles growing more forced, his eyes losing their warmth with each passing page. But it was the newspaper clippings tucked between the pages that made Sarah's blood run cold. Headlines about corruption scandals, political cover-ups, and the mysterious disappearance of a young woman who had been scheduled to testify before a grand jury. The woman's name wasn't mentioned in the articles, but the dates aligned perfectly with when Catherine had vanished from William's life. A loose document slipped from between the pages, a letter written in Catherine's handwriting, dated just days before Sarah was born. Her hands shook as she read, "My dearest William, by the time you read this, I will be gone. The men Senator Blackwood sent have made it clear that my testimony cannot be allowed to proceed. They've offered me a choice: disappear forever or watch everyone I love suffer the consequences. I choose to disappear, but I cannot take our daughter into hiding with me. It would not be fair to condemn her to a life of running and fear. I'm taking her to St. Mary's Convent, where she will be safe and loved. Tell her when she's old enough to understand that every decision I made was to protect her. Tell her that her mother loved her more than life itself. Our daughter." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. William wasn't just someone who had known her mother, he was her father. The revelation left her reeling, her legs giving out as she sank into one of the library's leather chairs. Everything made sense now. The way William had looked at her when she first arrived, the pain in his eyes, his desperate need to protect her. She had spent 18 years wondering about her father, and now she had found him under circumstances that made their relationship feel like both a blessing and a curse. Voices in the hallway outside the library made her quickly hide the photo, album and documents. Heavy footsteps approached the door, followed by the sound of someone testing the handle. "William, I know you're hiding something," came a voice that was similar to William's, but harder, colder. "That girl who was asking about Catherine Mitchell, where is she?" I sent her away, William replied, his voice steady despite the obvious lie. Told her I'd never heard of Catherine Mitchell. Don't lie to me, brother. My sources at the convent told me she left 3 days ago with Catherine's letter. That letter contains information that could destroy everything we've built. Everything you've built, you mean? William's voice was bitter now. I never wanted any part of your arrangement with Blackwood. But you profited from it, didn't you? This house, your business empire, all of it was built on the foundation of keeping certain truths buried. And now that girl threatens to dig them all up. Sarah pressed herself against the wall, her heart pounding so loudly she was afraid they would hear it through the door. She was beginning to understand the scope of what her mother had discovered, the reason she had been forced to disappear. Senator Blackwood and William's brother had been involved in something that required Catherine's silence, something worth destroying lives to protect. She's just a kid looking for answers about her mother, William said. She doesn't know anything. Yet. But Catherine was smart, and if she's anything like her mother, it won't take her long to piece things together. We need to find her before she starts asking the wrong questions to the wrong people. I won't let you hurt her. The silence that followed was charged with tension. When William's brother finally spoke, his voice carried a threat that made Sarah's skin crawl. You seem to forget who holds the power in this family, William. One phone call from me, and that girl will simply vanish, just like her mother was. Supposed to. The only difference is, this time there won't be any loose ends. Catherine didn't just vanish. William's voice was barely controlled fury. You and Blackwood made sure she could never come forward, could never tell the truth about what she witnessed. She was in the wrong place at the wrong time. Sometimes sacrifices have to be made for the greater good. The greater good? You? Mean your political ambitions and Blackwood's career? Their voices were moving away from the library door now, heading back toward the main staircase. Sarah waited until she was sure they were gone, before unlocking the door and creeping to the top of the stairs. She could still hear them talking in William's study below, their voices carrying up through the house's acoustics. The girl has to disappear. Cannot let her interfere with the election. Too much at stake to let sentiment cloud our judgment. Election. Sarah realized with growing horror that whatever her mother had witnessed 20 years ago was still relevant today. Senator Blackwood was running for re-election, and her very existence posed a threat to his campaign. She crept back to the library and began searching more systematically through the hidden documents. What she found painted a picture of corruption that ran deeper than she had imagined. Financial records showing illegal campaign contributions, photographs of private meetings between politicians and known criminals, and most damning of all, a recording device that had been hidden among the papers. With trembling fingers, Sarah pressed play on the small digital recorder. Her mother's voice filled the quiet library, clear and determined as she documented everything she had witnessed. Names, dates, amounts of money, detailed descriptions of meetings where illegal deals were struck. It was enough evidence to bring down not just Senator Blackwood, but an entire network of corrupt officials and businessmen. The recording ended with Catherine's voice breaking as she realized the magnitude of what she had uncovered. I know they'll come for me now. I know I can't stay and fight them, not when they have so much power and so little conscience. But someday someone will find this evidence. Someone will have the courage to use it. And when that day comes, justice will finally be served. As Sarah sat in the dim light of the library, holding the key to 20 years of buried secrets, she understood that she was that someone her mother had hoped would find the truth. But she also understood that seeking justice would put her in the same danger that had forced her mother to abandon her all those years ago. The sound of a car engine starting in the driveway told her that William's brother was leaving. But Sarah knew this was far from over. She had stumbled into a web of corruption and power that had already claimed her mother's life and freedom. Now she had to decide whether to run, as her mother had done, or stand and fight for the truth that had cost her family so much. As she carefully returned the evidence to its hiding place, Sarah made her decision. She would not run. She would not let her mother's sacrifice be in vain. But first she needed to find a way to trust the man downstairs, the man who was her father, but who had lived for 20 years as part of the very system that had destroyed their family. The house fell silent after the black sedan disappeared down the mountain road, leaving only the sound of Sarah's heartbeat echoing in her ears. She remained in the library for another hour, processing everything she had discovered, before finally gathering the courage to venture downstairs. She found William in his study, slumped in his chair with his head in his hands. Empty glasses and an open bottle of whiskey sat on the desk beside him, but he didn't appear to have been drinking. Instead, he looked like a man who had been carrying the weight of the world for 20 years and had finally reached his breaking point. "How long have you known?" Sarah asked quietly from the doorway. William looked up, his eyes red-rimmed with exhaustion and the pain. "Known what?" "That you're my father." The words hung in the air between them like a physical barrier. William's face crumpled, and for a moment he looked far older than his 58 years. "From the moment you said your name," he whispered, "you look exactly like she did at your age. Same eyes, same determined chin, same way of tilting your head when you're thinking." He gestured to an empty chair across from his desk. "Please sit, we have a lot to talk about." Sarah moved into the room but remained standing, her arms crossed defensively. "I found the photo albums. I found the recording." William's eyes widened with alarm. "Sarah, that recording is the reason my mother had to abandon me," Sarah finished. "Is the reason she spent the last 20 years in hiding. Is the reason your brother wants me to disappear." "My brother?" William's voice was filled with disgust. Richard was always ambitious, always willing to do whatever it took to get ahead. When Senator Blackwood offered him a position as his chief of staff, Richard saw it as his ticket to real power. He didn't care what he had to do to protect that opportunity. "Including covering up whatever my mother witnessed?" William nodded grimly. Catherine was working as a campaign volunteer for Blackwood's first Senate race. She was idealistic, believed in making a difference through the political process. One night she stayed late at campaign headquarters to finish some filing, and she overheard a conversation she wasn't supposed to hear. Sarah sank into the chair across from him, her legs suddenly weak. What did she hear? Blackwood was meeting with representatives of a pharmaceutical company that was facing federal investigation for price fixing. In exchange for campaign contributions that far exceeded legal limits, Blackwood promised to use his influence to make the investigation disappear. But that was just the beginning. Catherine kept listening, kept documenting, and what she discovered was an entire network of corruption that involved dozens of officials at the state and federal level. So she tried to go to the authorities. She tried to go to me first, William said softly. We had been dating for almost a year at that point, and she trusted me. But what she didn't know was that my brother was already deeply involved in Blackwood's operations. When I told Richard what Catherine had discovered, thinking he could help us figure out how to proceed, he immediately went to Blackwood. Sarah felt sick to her stomach. You betrayed her. I thought I was protecting her. William's voice broke. Richard convinced me that if Catherine went public with what she knew, she would be painted as a mentally unstable campaign volunteer with a grudge. He said they would destroy her credibility, ruin her life, make it impossible for anyone to believe her. He promised me that if she kept quiet, nothing would happen to her. But she didn't keep quiet. No, she didn't. Catherine was too principled to let corruption go unchallenged, even if it meant sacrificing her own safety. She started putting together a comprehensive case, documenting everything she could find. She was planning to take it to the FBI. William stood up and walked to the window, staring out at the mountains where snow was beginning to fall. The night before she was supposed to meet with federal agents, she called me. She was scared, said she thought someone was following her. She asked me to meet her at the airport. We were going to leave town together until the investigation was complete. But you didn't go. Richard showed up at my office that night with 2 of Blackwood's security people. They made it very clear that if I helped Catherine disappear, both of us would face consequences that went far beyond legal troubles. They showed me photographs of Catherine leaving her apartment, walking to her car, sitting in restaurants. They had been watching her for weeks. Sarah felt tears burning behind her eyes as she imagined her mother's terror during those final days. So you chose your own safety over hers. I chose what I thought was the lesser of two evils, William said quietly. Richard promised that if Catherine disappeared voluntarily, she would be left alone. They would stop looking for her, stop monitoring her, as long as she never surfaced again. But if I helped her, if I tried to protect her, they would make sure that neither of us lived to see the FBI. And you believed him? William turned from the window, his face etched with 20 years of regret. I was young and scared and foolish. I thought I could find Catherine after everything died down. Thought I could make it right. I waited at the airport until dawn, hoping she would show up despite everything. When she didn't, I tried to find her, but it was like she had vanished from the earth. Because she had to, Sarah said softly. She had to choose between her own safety and mine. You? William looked confused. Sarah pulled out her mother's letter and handed it to him. She was pregnant when she disappeared with me. She had to choose between taking me into hiding with her or giving me a chance at a normal life. She chose to give me up. William read the letter with growing horror, his hands shaking by the time he reached the end. I never knew, he whispered. All these years I never knew I had a daughter. She couldn't tell you, she couldn't trust anyone. They sat in silence for several minutes, both processing the weight of revelations that had turned their understanding of the past upside down. Finally, William spoke. What do we do now? Sarah looked at him with newfound determination. We finish what she started. Sarah, no. You don't understand how dangerous this is. These people don't hesitate to eliminate threats. They've already taken 20 years of my life, Sarah said firmly. 20 years with my mother. 20 years with you, 20 years of living with questions that no one would answer. I won't let them take any more. If we move against them, we'll be putting a target on both our backs. The target is already there, Sarah pointed out. Your brother made that clear when he was here. He's not going to let this go, not with Blackwood's re-election at stake. William studied his daughter's face, seeing in her the same fierce determination that had driven Catherine to risk everything for the truth. What are you proposing? We take everything we have, the recording, the documents, the photographs, and we give it to someone who can use it. A journalist, a federal prosecutor, someone with the power and the platform to make sure the truth comes out. It won't be enough, William said. 20 years have passed. Some of the evidence may be too old to prosecute. Some of the people involved may have covered their tracks or moved on. But not all of them, Sarah insisted. Blackwood is still in the Senate. Your brother is still his chief of staff. They're still using their positions for personal gain, still threatening people who get in their way. The corruption didn't end 20 years ago. It just got better at hiding. William was quiet for a long time, weighing the risks against the possibility of finally bringing justice for Catherine's sacrifice. When he looked up at Sarah, she saw a spark in his eyes that had been missing since she arrived. There's a journalist in Denver, he said slowly. Martha Rodriguez. She's been investigating political corruption for years, and she's got the reputation and the resources to handle something this big. But approaching her would be incredibly dangerous. If Blackwood or Richard find out, then we'll have to make sure they don't find out until it's too late, Sarah said. Over the next several hours, they developed a plan. William would use his business connections to arrange a meeting with Martha Rodriguez, ostensibly to discuss a potential story about corporate philanthropy. Sarah would remain hidden at the house, using the time to organize all the evidence they had collected and prepare copies to be distributed to multiple sources simultaneously. As they worked together, Sarah felt a strange sense of completeness. For the first time in her life, she was truly part of a family, even if that family was bound together by danger and shared purpose rather than peaceful domesticity. William, too, seemed to be coming alive as they planned their strategy, as if having a mission was awakening parts of himself that had been dormant since Catherine's disappearance. But their planning was interrupted by the sound of vehicles approaching the house. William peered through the curtains and cursed under his breath. It's Richard, and he's not alone. There are 3 cars, at least 6 men. Sarah felt her heart skip a beat. "What do we do?" "There's a safe room in the basement," William said urgently. "It's hidden behind the wine cellar. Take all the evidence with you and lock yourself in. No matter what happens, don't come out until you're sure they're gone." "What about you?" "I'll handle Richard. I'll convince him that you left, that I sent you away like I told him. He won't believe you. He'll have to. The alternative is unthinkable." As the sound of car doors slamming echoed through the mountain air, Sarah gathered all the documents and recording equipment, her hands moving with desperate efficiency. William led her quickly to the basement, showing her the hidden entrance to the safe room behind a false wall in the wine cellar. "No matter what you hear up there," William said as he sealed her into the soundproof room, "do not come out. Promise me." "I promise," Sarah whispered, though she wasn't sure it was a promise she could keep. As she heard William's footsteps retreating upstairs, Sarah huddled in the darkness with 20 years of explosive evidence clutched in her arms, listening to the muffled sounds of what she feared might be her father's final confrontation with the forces that had already destroyed so much of their family. Sarah sat in the darkness of the safe room, her heart pounding as muffled voices filtered through the reinforced walls. She couldn't make out individual words, but the tone of the conversation above grew increasingly heated. Every instinct told her to stay hidden, but when she heard what sounded like furniture being overturned and William's voice raised in anger, she knew she couldn't remain a passive observer. Carefully, she opened the hidden door and crept through the wine cellar to the basement stairs. The voices were clearer now, and what she heard made her blood run cold. "You're lying, William." Richard's voice was sharp with accusation. "I can smell her perfume in the house. That girl is here somewhere, and I'm going to find her." "I told you I sent her away," William replied, but there was strain in his voice. "She was just a confused kid looking for answers about her mother. I gave her some money and told her to go back where she came from. And you expect me to believe that? After what Catherine meant to you?" "Catherine has been gone for 20 years, William said bitterly. "I've learned not to let sentiment cloud my judgment." Sarah heard the sound of footsteps moving through the house, doors opening and closing, as Richard's men searched every room. She knew it was only a matter of time before they found the hidden entrance to the basement. But as she listened to the conversation above, she began to realize something that changed everything. Richard was talking about Catherine as if she was still alive. "Your old girlfriend was always too clever for her own good," Richard was saying. "Even after all these years in hiding, she couldn't resist reaching out to her daughter. Did you really think we wouldn't be monitoring the convent? Did you think we wouldn't know the moment that girl received Catherine's letter?" Sarah's hands flew to her mouth to stifle a gasp. Her mother was alive. After 20 years of believing, Catherine had perished shortly after giving birth to her. Sarah now learned that her mother had been living in hiding all this time. "Where is she?" William's voice was barely controlled fury. "Safe," Richard replied with cruel satisfaction. "As long as her daughter disappears quietly, Catherine will remain safe. But if that girl starts stirring up trouble, asking questions, trying to play hero with evidence that should have been destroyed decades ago—" "You bastard," William snarled. "You've been using Catherine as leverage this entire time." "Insurance policy," Richard corrected. "Catherine has been very useful over the years. Every time Blackwood faced a potential scandal, every time someone got too close to the truth, we simply reminded them that we had Catherine Mitchell in our custody. Amazing how quickly people back down when they realize we're serious about protecting our interests." Sarah's mind reeled as she processed this revelation. Her mother hadn't just disappeared. She had been held captive for 20 years, used as a living threat against anyone who might expose the corruption she had discovered. The weight of this knowledge was crushing, but it also filled her with a determination she had never felt before. She crept back to the safe room and quickly gathered the most damning pieces of evidence, stuffing them into a backpack along with the digital recorder. If her mother was alive, if there was a chance to save her, Sarah needed to act fast. The sound of the basement door opening sent her heart racing. Heavy footsteps descended the wooden stairs, and she could hear Richard's men methodically searching the lower level of the house. She had minutes, maybe less, before they discovered the wine cellar entrance. Sarah made a decision that would have terrified her just days ago, but now felt like the only logical choice. She activated the digital recorder and began speaking. In a clear, steady voice. "My name is Sarah Mitchell, daughter of Catherine Mitchell and William Ashford. If something happens to me, if I disappear like my mother was forced to, I want the world to know the truth." She quickly summarized everything. She had learned, naming names, providing dates, and describing the evidence she had found. When she finished, she uploaded the recording to a cloud storage account she had created on William's computer, then sent copies to every major news outlet she could think of, along with scanned copies of the most damaging documents. Just as she hit the final send button, the wine cellar door burst open. Richard Ashford stood there with two of his men, his face twisted with rage, when he saw Sarah crouched over the laptop. "What have you done?" he demanded, lunging toward her. But Sarah was ready for him. She had found something else in the safe room, a panic button that was connected directly to the local FBI field office. As Richard reached for her, she slammed her palm down on the red button. "I've done what my mother should have been able to do 20 years ago," Sarah said, standing to face him with more courage than she had ever possessed. "I've told the truth." Richard's face went pale as sirens began wailing in the distance. "You have no idea what you've just done. You've destroyed your own family." "No," Sarah replied firmly. "You destroyed our family 20 years ago. I'm just making sure everyone knows about it." The next few hours passed in a blur of federal agents' questions and revelations that shook the very foundations of Colorado politics. Martha Rodriguez, the investigative journalist William had planned to contact, arrived at the house before the FBI had even finished processing the scene. She had received Sarah's email package and was already working on what would become the biggest political scandal in the state's history. But the most important moment came when Agent Jennifer Walsh, the FBI's lead investigator on political corruption cases, pulled Sarah aside with news that made her knees nearly buckle with relief. "We've found your mother," Agent Walsh said gently. "She's alive and she's safe. She's been held at a private facility in Wyoming under an assumed identity, but we've confirmed it's Catherine Mitchell. She's been asking about you for 20 years." The reunion took place 3 days later in a federal safe house in Denver. Sarah had imagined this moment countless times since learning her mother was alive, but nothing could have prepared her for the reality of seeing Catherine Mitchell for the first time since she was a baby. Catherine was 52 now, her dark hair streaked with grey, her face lined with years of worry and captivity. But when she saw Sarah walk through the door, her eyes lit up with a joy that transcended all the pain of their separation. "My baby," Catherine whispered, pulling Sarah into an embrace that both women had been waiting 20 years to share. "My beautiful, brave baby." They talked for hours, filling in the gaps of 2 decades spent apart. Catherine had indeed been held against her will, moved from facility to facility whenever Richard and Blackwood felt she was becoming too much of a risk. She had been told that Sarah was safe in the convent, but any attempt to contact her daughter would result in harm coming to the child she had sacrificed everything to protect. "I wrote you letters every day," Catherine confessed, tears streaming down her face. "Hundreds of them. I kept them all, hoping that someday I would be able to give them to you." William joined them the following day, and for the first time in 20 years, their family was complete. The reunion was emotional and complicated. There were years of pain and separation to work through, but there was also an undeniable bond between the three of them that had survived even the most impossible circumstances. The legal proceedings that followed were swift and decisive. Richard Ashford was arrested on charges ranging from kidnapping to obstruction of justice. Senator Blackwood's political career ended in disgrace as evidence of his corruption was broadcast across every major news network. The pharmaceutical executives who had started the chain of corruption 2 decades earlier found themselves facing federal indictments. But the most satisfying moment for Sarah came when she testified before a congressional committee investigating political corruption. Sitting at the witness table with her mother beside her, she told the story of a young woman who had been willing to sacrifice everything for the truth, and a system that had been willing to destroy innocent lives to protect its secrets. "My mother spent 20 years in captivity, Because she witnessed corruption and had the courage to speak out, Sarah told the assembled senators and representatives. I spent 20 years without my family because powerful people decided that their political ambitions were more important than human lives. This cannot be allowed to happen again. The hearing was broadcast live across the nation, and Sarah's testimony became a rallying cry for political reform and accountability. Within months, new legislation was passed to protect whistleblowers and strengthen oversight of political campaigns. 6 months after her testimony, Sarah stood with William and Catherine on the steps of the Colorado State Capitol, where a memorial was being dedicated to victims of political corruption. The three of them had used William's resources to establish a foundation that provided legal support and protection for people willing to expose government wrongdoing. "Do you ever regret leaving the convent?" Catherine asked her daughter as they watched families gathering for the dedication ceremony. Sarah thought about the question seriously. The convent had been safe, predictable, free from the dangers and complications that had defined the past year of her life. But it had also been a prison, cutting her off from the truth about her family and her own identity. "No," she said finally. "I needed to find you, both of you, and I needed to finish what you started." William, who had spent the past months rebuilding his relationship with his daughter and reconnecting with the woman he had never stopped loving, put his arms around both of them. "Your mother always said that the truth has a way of finding the light," he said softly, "even when people try to bury it in darkness." As the sun set over the Rocky Mountains, painting the sky in brilliant shades of gold and pink, Sarah felt a peace she had never known in her 18 years at the convent. She had found her family, exposed the corruption that had torn them apart, and ensured that her mother's sacrifice had not been in vain. The journey that had begun with a desperate flight from a mountain convent had led her to discoveries she could never have imagined. She had learned that sometimes the greatest act of love is letting go, that truth is worth any sacrifice, and that even the most powerful forces of corruption cannot ultimately triumph over courage and determination. Standing with her parents, in the gathering dusk, Sarah understood that her real life was just beginning. The 18-year-old girl who had walked away from St. Mary's Convent was gone, replaced by a young woman who had found her voice, her purpose, and her place in the world. The truth had indeed found the light, and it had set them all free. Femme. Da Historia. Dear listeners, we hope that Sarah, Catherine, and William's powerful story of courage, family, and justice has moved you as much as it moved us to tell it. Their journey reminds us that even in the darkest circumstances, love and truth have the power to overcome corruption and fear. If this story touched your heart, we've prepared a special playlist filled with equally captivating tales of families reunited and justice served. You can find it by clicking to your left. If you enjoyed Sarah's incredible journey from the convent walls to the halls of power, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give this video a thumbs up. Every day we bring you unique stories that explore the complexity of human relationships and the triumph of the human spirit. Don't miss our upcoming